while the neighbor poured kibble into her dog's bowl. I was licking rainwater from a muddy puddle, my knees buried in gravel, my mouth shaking from the cold. And from the kitchen window, he laughed. I remember the way his voice cut through the evening like broken glass. He sounded like a man watching a show, and I was the show. My name is Lorraine Williams. I'm 71 years old, and I live alone in a trailer just outside of Lubbock, Texas. People think I'm strange. They see me watering my little plants every morning, polishing my doorknob twice a day, avoiding eye contact at the corner store. I sell embroidered dish towels at the weekend flea market. They're neat, delicate, lined with sunflowers or stitched Bible verses, the kind of thing grandmothers sell. No one ever asks about my past, and I never offer it. Some days I sit in my folding chair out front and let the wind hit my face. I close my eyes and pretend it's rain even when it's dry. The desert air is sharp, but I prefer it that way. Dryness doesn't betray you like water does. Water hides in corners and puddles, collects in the cracks, reminds me of the times I was forced to drink it from the dirt while he watched. I was 8 when I stopped thinking of myself as a child. I was something else by then, something closer to what they said I was. A thing, a burden, a beast that needed to be broken. I grew up in a house that looked like it had already given up. A single-story wreck of rotting wood, peeled paint, and screen doors that never shut properly. The backyard was a patch of red clay, cracked open like wounds in the earth. There were no trees for shade, no swing sets, no toys, just one rusted lawn chair and the shadow of the house leaning over it like a warning. We lived at the edge of nowhere. People didn't drive down our street unless they were lost or drunk, and even then, they didn't stay long. My mother's name was Susan. She was small, quiet, always busy. She moved like she was cleaning something no one else could see. Her face had a permanent tightness, like a knot that never came undone. She used to tell me, without looking at me, that being a woman meant learning to suffer in silence. She believed that real women didn't cry, didn't complain, didn't fight back. They just endured. I think that's what she was doing, enduring. But it doesn't excuse what she allowed. Jack came into our lives when I was 5. He was tall, wide, always reeking of motor oil and beer. He had calloused hands and a voice like gravel. People liked Jack. He fixed their cars cheap. He made jokes in the grocery line. He helped neighbors move furniture. But behind our front door, he was something else. He looked at me like I was in his way, like I was a reminder of something he hated. And yet, he couldn't stop looking. I remember the first time he tied the rope. It was a thick, dirty cord that usually hung in the garage. He said I needed to learn respect, said I needed to learn how to behave. I had spilled water on the kitchen floor. That's all it took. He dragged me to the backyard and tied my wrist to the fence. My mother stood by the sink, scrubbing a plate that was already clean. She didn't speak. She didn't even turn her head. I kept thinking she would come, that she would say something, but she never did. The sun was burning that day. I felt it through my scalp, pounding like a drum. My knees sank into the hard ground, and I watched the ants crawl over my toes. I tried not to cry. I thought that if I stayed still and silent, maybe he'd untie me sooner. But every hour he left me there made me smaller. I started to believe I deserved it, that I had failed some test I didn't know I was taking. After that, it became normal. There wasn't a warning, no raised voices, no arguments, just silence, followed by rope. I began to recognize the sound of it dragging across the floor, the weight of it in his hand, the way my mother wiped her hands on her apron and turned her back. Some days I was out there before breakfast. Some nights I stayed until the moon rose, alone with the mosquitoes and the buzz of distant trucks. I learned the feel of soil pressed into my skin, the taste of gravel. I counted time by the changing angles of the sun, by the way the neighbor's dog barked at certain hours. Sometimes I envied that dog. He had a name. He had a bowl of clean water. He had someone who cared if he was cold. I didn't. I had Jack's laugh, my mother's silence, and the sting of rope on my wrists. Even now I can smell the backyard when I close my eyes. Dust, rust, dried blood, old sweat. The air would thicken in the afternoon until it was hard to breathe. The ground would heat up and burn the back of my legs. Sometimes I'd hear music from a radio inside the house, a love song, a hymn, and I'd wonder what kind of people listened to those songs while a child sat tied to a fence just a few feet away. I think the worst part wasn't the pain. It was the way they looked at me like I wasn't human, like I wasn't their daughter, not even a child, just something they had to put up with, a punishment for a mistake they never named. I started to disappear, first in their eyes, then in my own. No one came to help, no neighbor knocked, no teacher asked. I went to school with bruises and cracked lips, and no one said a word. Maybe they didn't see, maybe they didn't want to. I learned early that suffering in silence wasn't just something my mother believed in. It was something the world practiced. I still sit outside some mornings watching the sky turn pale. There's a certain light just before dawn that feels like the past, soft and cruel at the same time. I sip my tea. I watch the wind lift the dust. And in the corner of my eye, I see the shape of a rope that isn't there. I know it's gone. I know he's gone. But part of me is still kneeling in that yard, waiting for someone to see me, to really see me. The house I grew up in wasn't much more than a box with windows. The wood was soft and rotten in places, and if you stepped too hard on the back porch, the boards would groan like something dying. The screen door banged every time the wind passed through, which was often. Everything in that house seemed tired. The curtains were always closed. The carpet smelled like old grease. Nothing matched, not the plates, not the furniture, not the people living inside. We lived on the edge of a nowhere town in Oklahoma, in a neighborhood people drove past without slowing down. If someone pulled into your driveway, it usually meant trouble. That was the kind of place it was. Broken mailboxes, overgrown yards, a dozen barking dogs, no sidewalks, no laughter. My mother kept to herself. She had no friends, no visitors. Her voice was a whisper unless she was angry, and she was angry often. She had this look in her eyes like everything in the world was a burden. She moved like her body was heavier than it should be. When I was very small, I remember thinking she looked like a shadow, even in the sunlight. She'd wake up before me, already bitter, already tired. She'd scrub the same spot on the floor for an hour like it would confess something. I used to think she was a ghost, something not quite alive. But ghosts don't choose silence like she did. They haunt because they can't let go. She stayed silent because it was safer, or maybe because she didn't care. I never called Jack my dad. Even as a child, I knew that word didn't belong to him. He wasn't part of me. He was something that got added to our lives like rust or mold. One day he just appeared. My mother told me he'd be staying. That was it. No explanation, no kindness. She didn't even ask what I thought. From the beginning, Jack was loud, dirty, heavy. He stomped instead of walked. He slammed instead of closed. His laugh was sharp and joyless like a blade scraping metal. And when he looked at me, it was never soft, never safe. There's a moment I remember clearly. I was 6. It was summer, hot and still. The air in the house was thick, and sweat made my clothes stick to my skin. Jack was drinking from a bottle wrapped in a paper bag. My mother was folding laundry, not speaking. I dropped a sock. Just a sock. It fell from the pile and landed near his boot. That was all it took. He stared at it for a second, then looked at me like I had spit in his food. He didn't yell. He didn't hit. Not then. He just kicked the sock across the room and said, "Clean up after yourself, pig." I ran to get it. My hands were shaking. My face burned with shame. My mother didn't look up. She just kept folding, like nothing had happened, like I wasn't there, like none of it mattered. After that, it became routine. I was never enough, never quiet enough, never clean enough, never invisible enough. Jack made sure I knew I was unwanted. He called me names. He mimicked my voice. He'd wait for my mother to leave the room before twisting my ear or yanking my arm. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would leave marks. At least not then. Just little warnings. little reminders that I was beneath him and my mother. She saw. She always saw. She just pretended not to. Sometimes she'd say I was exaggerating, that I was sensitive, that I needed to toughen up. She had this phrase she loved: "Girls like you have to learn the hard way." She never said what that meant, but I would find out. By the time I was 7, I was already spending more time outside than in. The backyard was my prison and my refuge. It was where I went when the air inside got too heavy, where I got sent when Jack was in a mood, which was often. At first, it was just him telling me to get out. Then it was the rope, thick, scratchy, knotted at one end. It had a smell to it, like gasoline and mold. He kept it hanging on a hook near the back door. Every time I saw it move in the breeze, my stomach clenched. The first time he used it, he didn't say a word. He just grabbed my wrist and dragged me outside, my bare feet scraped across the porch. He tied me to the fence post like it was the most normal thing in the world. Like this was just how you disciplined a girl who didn't know her place. My mother stood by the sink and washed dishes while I cried. I begged her to stop him. I screamed until my throat burned. She never turned around. That first time, he left me there for maybe an hour, but it felt like a lifetime. I remember the sun hitting my scalp, the way the grass poked through the dirt, the taste of my own sweat running down my lips. I remember watching a squirrel on the neighbor's fence and wondering if it felt freer than I did. After that, the rope became part of my life. It was no longer a threat. It was a routine, a consequence, a fact. If I said the wrong thing, I got the rope. If I dropped a fork, I got the rope. If I looked at him too long or not long enough, if I breathed too loud, it didn't matter. The reasons changed. The outcome didn't. Some days, I would sit outside and count the ants crawling by. I would try to distract myself by naming clouds, but mostly I just waited for the door to open, for the rope to loosen, for someone to care. No one ever came. The neighbors never said a word, and I know they saw. Our fence was low. Our backyard was exposed. Sometimes I'd catch their eyes as they walked past. They'd look away quickly, like glancing too long would make them responsible. There was an older boy 2 houses down. He used to throw rocks near me, never at me, just close enough to make me flinch. Sometimes he'd laugh, sometimes he just stared. The worst part was how normal it all became. I stopped crying, stopped pleading. I learned to sit still and stay quiet. I learned how to shift my body so the rope didn't dig in so deep. I learned how to wait without hoping. I don't think a child should ever know how to do those things. My mother began to treat it like a joke. She'd say things like, "At least she's not inside breaking things," or "She likes the fresh air." I remember one day it was raining, cold and sharp. She opened the door, looked at me shivering and said, "Don't catch a cold." Then she laughed and closed it again. I was soaked, muddy. My lips were purple, but she smiled like it was all some ridiculous game. There were moments I wanted to believe it wasn't real, that I'd wake up and be in a different house, with a different mother, one who would wrap me in a towel and hold me when I cried. But that mother didn't exist, not for me. What I had was a woman who handed me over like a chore, a man who tied knots like he was fixing a car, and a backyard that knew more of my secrets than any human ever would. That yard became a part of me. It knew my shape, my scars, my silence. And even now, all these years later, when I hear a rope snap or smell rain on dirt, I go back there. Not because I want to, because part of me never left. After a while, the rope stopped feeling like punishment. It just became what happened, like brushing your teeth or taking out the trash. It was a part of life, my life. The backyard was my world, my prison, my stage, my grave. The dirt knew the shape of my knees better than any bed ever did. The air back there was different, stiller. It didn't carry music or laughter, only the distant hum of cars and the occasional bark from the neighbor's dog. Most mornings I would wake up already knowing. I could feel it before it happened. The way Jack slammed his boots on the floor, the way my mother's voice went flat. Sometimes I would try to make myself invisible, I would clean faster, be quieter, make fewer trips to the kitchen, but it didn't matter. The rules changed depending on his mood. There was no logic, no mercy. One time, I forgot to close the bathroom cabinet. That was enough. The rope burned more in the summer. It dug into my wrists like it had teeth. I learned to adjust my body just right to avoid cutting circulation. I became an expert at survival without anyone teaching me. I counted the hours by the sun's path across the sky. I could tell when it was lunchtime by the smell of bacon from next door, or when the school bus dropped off the neighbor's kid. That child would sometimes stare at me, his backpack still on, mouth open, not understanding. Or maybe he did. The ground was cracked and rough like the skin on my elbows. Ants would crawl over me and I stopped brushing them off. My body was no longer mine. It belonged to the dirt, the sky, the rope. When it rained, I'd curl into myself and try to breathe slowly so the cold didn't take over. When it was hot, the metal fence would burn against my skin, branding me without fire. My lips would crack, and my throat would stick to itself. I once licked the condensation from the side of the old air conditioning unit, just to feel something wet. I began to think of the dog next door as more human than me. His name was Scout. I could hear the little girl calling for him in the evenings. He had a name, a voice calling for him, a bowl of fresh water that was refilled every morning. Sometimes he barked when he saw me. Sometimes he just sat there, ears up as if trying to understand. One time he whined. That made me cry more than the rope ever did. I wasn't allowed to speak. If I screamed, Jack would come out and stuff a rag into my mouth. If I cried too loud, my mother would open the window and tell me to grow up. So I stopped. I let the silence grow inside me like mold. I talked to myself inside my head, made up stories, pretended I was a character in a book who had powers and could fly away. But even in my imagination, I was still tied down. They started to treat it like a game. Jack would toss me stale bread like he was feeding pigeons. He'd laugh and tell me to bark for it. I didn't bark. Not the first time, not the second, but eventually I did. Because hunger is louder than pride. I learned that early. The bread would land in the dirt and I would pick around the rocks. One time it had ants on it. I ate it anyway. The worst was when they invited others to watch. Sometimes on the weekends, Jack's friends would come over to drink. They'd sit in the backyard in lawn chairs, cans of beer sweating in their hands, smoke swirling around their heads. They'd point at me, make bets on how long I could go without water. One man took out his phone, said he wanted to film it, said he'd never seen a kid so obedient. They laughed like it was all some comedy show. I became entertainment, a warning, a joke. There was one night that never left me. It was a Friday. The sky had turned a strange shade of greenish gray, like a storm was coming but never did. Jack had just gotten paid. That always meant whiskey, loud music, doors slamming, my mother's silence. I got tied up early that day. I wasn't even sure what I did wrong. Maybe nothing. Probably nothing. I had learned not to ask. The rope was tighter than usual. My wrist started to bleed after the first hour. I felt the blood run warm and slow down my arm. The ants found it before I could hide it. I tried to twist my arm so the wound faced the ground, but it didn't help. The blood soaked into the dirt, and I watched it disappear. I remember thinking maybe if I bled enough, I could vanish too. It got dark. They forgot about me. Or maybe they didn't. The house lights turned off one by one. I was still tied up, no blanket, no food. My legs ached so badly that I thought they'd snap if I moved. The moon was full. I remember that. I remember the way it stared down like a spotlight, exposing everything. I remember hearing coyotes howling in the distance. And I remember the sound of Scout barking in response. I started humming a song, something I heard once in church. I couldn't remember the words, just the melody. It was enough to keep me awake, or maybe it was fear that did. My body was shaking, from cold, from hunger, from knowing that if I passed out, I might not wake up, but maybe that would have been better. I wanted my mother to come out, just once, to check, to ask, to care. But the kitchen windows stayed closed. No silhouette, no flicker of light, no hope. That night I dreamed of a rope that turned into wings, of a yard that opened into a meadow, of a world where girls like me didn't get left outside to rot. I woke up to the sun hitting my face and the rope still burning into my skin. My lips were stuck together. My dress was soaked in sweat. My legs were numb, but I was alive. And that felt like a betrayal. Each day after that felt heavier. I stopped imagining escapes. I stopped making up names for the clouds. The backyard wasn't a place anymore. It was a state of being. I had become the thing they said I was. An animal, a pest, a stain on their life. The rope wasn't what tied me. Their laughter did. Their silence did. Their choice to see me suffer and not blink. The dirt knew my secrets. The fence knew my shame. And every scar on my wrist became a chapter I was never allowed to write down. I wasn't living. I was surviving a story no one would ever read. There's a point where pain becomes background noise, where it no longer arrives with surprise, but lives in the skin like a stain that will never come out. That is what happened to me. I stopped reacting. I stopped bleeding. I stopped hoping. I became what they wanted. Quiet, small, broken. I was no longer their daughter. I was an object that could be mocked, moved, punished, forgotten. One afternoon, Jack came home drunk, louder than usual, laughing to himself as he stumbled into the kitchen. I was wiping the counter, trying to stay invisible. He walked past me, then stopped, looked at me, then to my mother. He said, "Watch this." Without hesitation, he grabbed a pair of shears from the drawer and yanked me outside by the arm. I didn't struggle. Struggling made it worse. He pushed me onto a wooden stool in the dirt and started cutting. Not my clothes, my hair. He sheared me like livestock, not carefully, not gently. Chunks fell into the dust, sticking to the sweat on my shoulders. My mother came to the doorway and watched. Not for long, just enough to nod. When he was done, he stood back and said, "Now you look like what you are." I didn't ask what that meant. I already knew. My head was bleeding in 2 places, the skin raw from the blades. That night, when I looked at my reflection in the broken piece of mirror I kept hidden under my mattress, I didn't recognize the face staring back. I looked like a prisoner, like something discarded. That was the point. From that day on, the haircuts became ritual. Every time I disobeyed or disappointed, out came the scissors. Sometimes it was my mother who held them. Her hands never trembled. She'd say, "Maybe now you'll learn. Maybe now he'll stop being so angry." But he never stopped. Because it wasn't about anger. It was about control. It was about turning me into a thing. Something beneath them. Something they could laugh at. The humiliation wasn't just behind closed doors. Word got out. Children in the neighborhood started calling me names. Stray, freak, animal girl. Some would throw rocks near the fence and dare each other to get close. A few times, boys stood in the alley and made barking noises when they saw me. I wanted to sink into the earth. I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. I started covering my face with dirt, not to hide the bruises, but because I felt ashamed of having a face at all. Jack began escalating. He didn't just tie me up anymore, he positioned me like a joke. Once he made me crawl in circles, saying he was training me. He gave me a dog bowl with rainwater in it, told me I could drink if I licked it like I meant it. I was so thirsty I didn't hesitate. I remember the grit of rust on my tongue, the way the water made my stomach cramp. He laughed so hard he dropped his beer can. My mother was in the window again, watching. She turned away only after I vomited. There were other times he invited friends over, men with loud mouths and mean eyes. They'd sit in folding chairs, drinking, watching me from across the yard, like I was entertainment. One asked if I did tricks. Another tossed a half-eaten sandwich at my feet and said, "Let's see if she begs." They laughed as I stared at it, trembling, unsure if eating would make them laugh harder or make them leave me alone. I chose wrong. I always did. I bent down and picked it up. My mother walked out with a fresh pitcher of lemonade and offered them glasses. She didn't look at me. She never looked at me. I stopped sleeping through the night. My dreams were full of barking, chains, shadows. that stretched across my chest and held me down. I started wetting the bed again. My mother stopped washing the sheets. She said, "Sleep outside if you're going to live like that." So I did. I took a thin blanket and curled up under the porch. The smell of mildew and rotting wood filled my lungs. It was still better than her voice. One winter, I caught a fever. I had been left outside for hours tied to the tree, barefoot on frozen mud. My body shook uncontrollably. I bit my own tongue trying to stay still. Blood filled my mouth. I remember thinking it tasted like pennies. Jack came out once, looked at me and said, "If you die out here, no one's going to miss you." I wanted to believe he was wrong. I wanted to believe someone somewhere would notice, but I didn't even believe it myself. The fever worsened. I lost count of time. I heard things that weren't there. I saw my father, not Jack, but my real father, the one who left when I was 3. He was standing near the gate. He didn't say anything, just stared, like he didn't know me. I reached for him. My fingers trembled, but when I blinked, he was gone. Only the cold remained. I curled up against the tree and waited. For what, I didn't know. For silence, for sleep, for someone to care. When I woke up, I was lying on the kitchen floor. My mother was kneeling beside me with a bowl of water and a rag. She wiped my forehead like a stranger might. No emotion, no words, just a hand going through the motions. I looked at her and tried to speak. My lips cracked. She pressed a finger to them and said, "Be quiet. You scared him last night. You need to stop being so dramatic." Then she left. I never asked how I got inside, whether she carried me or he did, whether I collapsed and they dragged me in like a rug. I never knew, and I never asked again. After that night, the rules changed, not for the better. Jack said I needed to toughen up. He stopped feeding me regularly, said it would build character. My stomach growled so loud in class one day that the teacher sent me to the nurse. I lied and said I ate too fast at breakfast. I got used to the dizziness. I got used to eating weeds from the edge of the yard. They tasted bitter, made my tongue numb, but it was something. The older I got, the more creative they became. Jack found new ways to humiliate me. One day he smeared peanut butter on the porch and told me to lick it clean, like a good girl. My mother stood there holding a broom, saying nothing. The neighbors could see. I knew they could. But they closed their blinds, pretended not to hear. Every part of my life became performance. I was an actress in a role I never auditioned for. I learned when to flinch, when to freeze, when to obey. My body was no longer mine. It was a prop, a joke, a canvas for their cruelty. And through it all, my mother stayed silent, her absence louder than any slap, her approval of his actions written in every moment she did nothing. Sometimes I wondered if she saw herself in me, if she hated me because I was the version of her that couldn't pretend anymore. Or maybe she just stopped feeling anything at all. I began to hate my own reflection. I scratched at my arms until they bled, hoping to peel away the version of me they had built. But the skin always remained. The shame always stayed. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't become invisible enough to disappear. And so I stayed, in the yard, in the silence, in the skin that no longer felt like mine. Not because I wanted to, but because I didn't believe the world outside would be any different. Because when you are treated like an animal for long enough, you start to believe you are one. Her name was Mrs. Langley. She lived 2 houses down in a pale yellow home with white shutters that always looked too clean for our street. I never spoke to her. I wasn't allowed. My mother said she was a gossip, a lonely widow with too much time and too many cats. But I remember the first time I caught her looking. I was tied near the fence, my back to the rose, when I felt it. That strange tension when someone is watching but trying not to be seen. I turned my head, and there she was, standing in her yard, holding a basket of laundry, frozen. She looked right at me. Not quickly, not ashamed, but like she was trying to make sense of what she was seeing. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just stared until her husband called from inside, and she disappeared behind the screen door. I thought she'd never bring it up again. Most people didn't. They saw me out there and turned away, some out of fear, others out of guilt. Some probably thought I deserved it, but Mrs. Langley kept looking. A day later, I saw her again. This time, she wasn't holding laundry. She was just standing at the edge of her porch, watching. Her face was tense, like she was holding her breath. I remember wondering what she saw, whether she saw a child or just a dirty girl tied to a post. The days blurred together by then. The rope, the bowl, the laughing, the smell of beer from Jack's mouth, the cigarette burns near the back step. One afternoon, I'd been out in the heat for hours. The sun had split the sky open and everything shimmered like glass. I was dizzy. My lips were cracked so deep they bled. My body was covered in dust, my hands shaking. I remember pressing my face into the fence to feel the shadow on the other side, to steal a little coolness. That was when I saw her again. Through the gaps in the wood, Mrs. Langley was staring, not from her porch this time, but from behind the wheel of her car. She had pulled into the alley. She was parked across from our yard, engine off, windows rolled down. Her eyes were red. She didn't get out. She didn't say anything, but she saw me, and she didn't look away. That night, things were worse than usual. Jack had broken a lamp in the kitchen. My mother blamed me, though I had been outside all day. She dragged me in by the arm, screamed that I ruined everything. Jack was already pacing. His face was flushed. He shoved me down and kicked over the bowl, said animals didn't deserve to eat indoors. He grabbed the rope, said I'd learn to listen, said maybe I needed to sleep outside again like before. My mother stood by the fridge, her arms crossed. She didn't stop him. She never did. I remember the sharp sting of the knot behind my neck, the way my shoulder wrenched as he pulled me back into the yard. The dirt was still warm from the day. The night smelled like burnt oil and cut grass. He tied me tighter than usual, left without a word. The door slammed behind him. I curled into myself and tried not to cry. Crying meant weakness. Crying meant punishment. I stared at the stars instead. I counted the seconds between breaths, trying to calm the pounding in my chest, and then I passed out. I woke up to light. Not moonlight, not morning sun, flashlights, bright beams cutting through the dark, voices, real ones, not the ones I made up in my head to keep myself company. I blinked against the glare. A man's voice said, "Over here, she's here." I tried to sit up, but the rope held me down. A woman's hand touched my arm gently. She said, "It's okay. You're safe now." I didn't understand what was happening. Everything felt too fast, too loud. There were people in uniforms. There were radios crackling. The door to the house slammed open and I heard shouting. My mother's voice, Jack's growl, the sound of boots on wood. I kept waiting to be pulled back, to be punished again. But that didn't happen. A blanket was wrapped around my shoulders. Someone cut the rope. The feeling of it releasing from my skin was surreal, like my body didn't know how to exist without it. They put me in the back of a police car. I didn't resist. I didn't ask questions. I didn't speak. One of the officers offered me a bottle of water. I stared at it for a long time before taking a sip. Cold, clean. It tasted like something I didn't deserve. At the station, they asked me my name. I whispered it. They asked me how long this had been happening. I didn't know how to answer. What did time even mean when your life was measured in knots and bruises? They took photos, documented the marks on my wrists, the bald patches on my scalp, the burns on my arms. A nurse cleaned my face with a wet cloth and said, "You poor baby." I flinched at the word baby. It didn't fit me, not anymore. They placed me in a temporary shelter that night. The walls were soft blue. The bed had a blanket with cartoon animals. The air smelled like lemon cleaner and old books. A woman came in and told me I could sleep, that no one would tie me up here, that no one would laugh. I didn't believe her. I sat in the corner for hours, afraid to lie down, afraid it was a trick. I stayed awake until the sun rose. The next morning, a social worker came to talk to me. Her name was Maria. She had kind eyes and a notebook full of questions. I didn't answer most of them. I didn't know how. She said someone had reported what was happening, that someone had seen me and didn't look away. She didn't say the name, but I knew. I knew it was Mrs. Langley. I knew it was the woman who watched, who listened, who finally chose to speak. The trial came months later. I didn't go. I was still too fragile, too fractured. I was told Jack pled guilty. My mother said it was all lies, that I was dramatic, that I ruined everything. She never visited, not once. No letters, no phone calls, nothing. It was like I had never been born, like I had never mattered, but I did matter. Someone proved that by seeing me. The shelter turned into a group home, then a foster placement, then another. I moved through houses like wind through trees, never quite settling, never quite safe, but always, always free of rope. I started school again. I was behind. I couldn't focus. I flinched when doors closed too hard. I refused to sit near windows. I hated the color yellow because it reminded me of the house. I stopped talking when boys entered the room. My foster parents were patient. Some of them. Others weren't. I learned to adapt. I became quiet, observant, careful. I lived in my head, in stories, in books with strong girls who survived worse. I read every night under the covers until my eyes burned, because the books didn't hurt me. They never laughed, and even though the rope was gone, I still felt it sometimes, in the silence between words, in the cold sweat after dreams, in the way my own voice trembled when I tried to tell someone about the past. I'd reach for the words and they would vanish, as if afraid to be spoken out loud. But the truth remained, carved into my body, my memory, my silence. And the moment that truth met the eyes of someone who refused to look away, everything began to shift. Not instantly, not completely, but enough to breathe again, enough to remember that I was not an animal, that I was a child, a girl, a person, someone worth seeing. I didn't magically heal. No one ever does. You don't step out of hell and suddenly feel the sun on your face without flinching. Healing is slower than pain. It drips into you like rain into dry earth. Sometimes it evaporates before it ever sinks in. But some drops stayed. They found the cracks in me and planted something that grew, quietly, painfully, in silence. The first time someone hugged me without reason, I froze. It was a foster mother named Elaine. She made quilts and spoke in questions, never assumptions. One night after dinner, she leaned in and wrapped her arms around me. Just like that. I didn't know what to do. My muscles tightened, my breathing stopped. I didn't hug her back. Not then. I just stood there, waiting for the slap that never came. But I remembered the smell of her sweater, lavender and fabric softener. That scent clung to my shirt for hours. I buried my face in the collar and cried into it when no one was watching. Because that was the first time I realized touch didn't always mean pain. I got older, moved through more homes. I never stayed too long in one place. Trust came slowly, if at all. But I learned. I learned how to make tea, how to sew a button, how to write poetry I never showed anyone. I learned how to survive in a world that had once tried to erase me. I never married. I didn't want to. I never wanted to give anyone the power to pull me back into that yard. But I had friends. I had quiet moments. I had mornings when I woke up and didn't feel afraid. And that was more than I ever thought I'd have. I became a caretaker in my 30s. Elderly patients, most of them lonely, forgotten. I understood them. I understood silence. I could sit in a room with someone for hours and never speak. And somehow, they felt heard. One woman, Miss Bernice, told me I had soft hands. She said, "You must have grown up loved." I smiled and nodded. Some lies are kinder than the truth. Now, at 71, I live in a trailer with creaky floors and wildflowers growing through the cracks in the porch. I wake up with my back aching and my fingers stiff, but I wake up free. I make coffee and watch the morning crawl over the horizon like a promise. I listen to the birds and hum the same church song I used to whisper when I thought I was dying in the backyard. I have a small garden, mostly herbs and stubborn tomatoes. They don't always grow straight, but they grow. Like me, crooked, weathered, alive. I don't keep mirrors in my house. Not because I'm afraid of what I'll see, but because I finally stopped needing proof that I exist. I feel it when I breathe without fear, when I eat without shame, when I close my eyes and sleep without rope marks around my wrists. There are still shadows. There always will be. Sometimes when the wind howls through the cracks in my windows, I hear him laughing. I see the flash of scissors, the bite of winter air. But those memories no longer own me. They visit like ghosts, but they do not stay. I light a candle. I speak their names in my mind, and then I let them go. And still I carry her, the girl in the dirt, the one with scraped knees and hollow eyes. I carry her in every breath, every step, every choice not to give up. She is not my shame. She is my proof that I was never weak, never worthless, just unprotected. So I protect her now. I protect the girl who was once me. I give her the love I never got. I give her warmth. And when I see children playing outside, laughing freely, I send a silent prayer that none of them ever feel the way I did, that no one ever turns away when they need someone to look. If you are listening to this, and your story looks anything like mine, I want you to know something. You are not broken beyond repair. You are not what they did to you. You are not the silence that surrounded your screams. You are not the rope. You are not the shame. You are the survivor. You are the fire that stayed lit even when they tried to drown it. And if you've never been hurt like this, I ask one thing of you. Don't look away. If you see something, say something. If you suspect, speak. Because one voice, one phone call, one brave look into a backyard full of dirt and pain can save a life. It saved mine. Thank you for letting me share this part of my soul with you. It is not easy to dig through wounds that never fully close. But telling this story means I take back the power they tried to bury. It means I choose to live, loudly, fully, without shame. If you want to hear more stories like mine, stories of pain turned into power, stories of voices once silenced that now speak with strength, the next video is already on your screen. Maybe it holds the key for someone else. Maybe it's the voice you didn't know you needed. Please, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Not for me, but for the countless others still waiting to be seen. Every click helps this message reach another soul still stuck in the dark. Because survival is not the end, it is the beginning. And every beginning deserves to be heard.